politics and maybe life. And
Digha 5363, thank you for the 50 gifted subs. Israel-Palestine section. Yeah, I want to hear their overall values first.
in the context of this left-right political spectrum. You want to go first?
Yeah. So I think that we have a huge country full of a lot of people, a lot of individual talents, capabilities. And I think that the goal of government, broadly speaking, should be to try to ensure that everybody's able to achieve as much.
I am willing to go on Lex Fridman. I haven't had time. I don't know why people are so contentious. Like, I already said I would do it.
As possible. So on a liberal level, that usually means some people might need a little bit of a boost when it comes to things like education. They might need a little bit of a boost when it comes to providing certain necessities like housing or food or clothing. But broadly speaking, I mean, I'm still a liberal, not a communist or a socialist. I don't believe in the, total command economy, total communist takeover of all of the, economy. But I think that broadly speaking, the government should kind of like kick in and help people when they need it.
I'm glad D-Money is finally here so we can explain things correctly. Yes. Oh my God, run the ad during his opening. Dog shit. Destiny fans, once again, proving to just not be normal at all. Like, just can't hold it in at all, okay?
That government can and should be big.
Not necessarily. I noticed that when liberals talk about government, or especially taxes, it seems like they talk about it for taxes' sake or bigness sake. So people talk about taxes sometimes as like a punishment, like tax the rich. I think taxing the rich is fine insofar as it funds the programs that we want to fund. But Democrats have a really big problem demonizing success or wealth.
Why do you even give Ben Genesito as much time of day as you do? Because he is one of the most popular right-wing commentators out there, and his platform and his ideas are identical to many people that I despise. It's the same. Well, it's in some ways similar to why Destiny talks about me all the time, because regardless of the fact that Destiny tried to present himself as like a progressive or whatever, he fucking despises that shit. So that way he can just regularly fucking talk about like whatever I'm presenting and, well, not really tackle the issue head on, but instead talk about how, I'm bad. Anyway, let's keep going.
And I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing to be wealthy, to be a billionaire or whatever, as long as we're funding what we need to fund.
Ben, what do you think it means to be a conservative? What's the philosophy that underlies your political view?
So first of all, I'm glad that Destiny, you're already coming out as a Republican. That's exciting. We hold a lot in common in terms of, the basic idea that people ought to have as much opportunity as possible. And also insofar as the government should do the minimum amount necessary to interfere in people's lives in order to pursue certain functions, particularly
okay, how was that any different than what he said? Okay, you guys are in agreement then. Kiss and make up. Like, what do you mean?
The local level. So a lot of governmental discussions on a pragmatic level end up being discussions about where government ought to be involved, but also at what level government ought to be involved. And I have an incredibly subsidiary view of government. I think that, local governments, because you have higher levels of homogeneity and consent, are capable of doing more things.
Homogeneity at the local level. That's why. Yeah. That's why it works. That's a fucking straight up dog whistle, by the way. Oh, yeah. Homogeneity is the reason why local government is more effective. And not because, like, you get to see immediate tangible impacts of, like, your own election and your own outcomes. You vote for someone at the local level, you have more of a connection with them because they're not, like, 11 steps removed from you with, like, 1,000 different lobbyists that have that person's ear, okay? That's the reason. It has nothing to do with homogeneity. So dumb.
And as you abstract up the chain, it becomes more and more impractical and more divisive to do more things. In my view, government is basically there to preserve certain key liberties.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. It's a dog whistle, and it's laying the foundation against Nordic social democracies working as a counter, even though the reason why those Nordic social democracies work is not because of homogeneity at all.
Those key liberties pre-exist the government insofar as they are more important than what priorities the government has. The job of government is to maintain, for example, national defense, protection of property rights, protection of religious freedom. Right? These are the key focuses of government as generally expressed in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. And I agree with the general philosophy of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Now, that doesn't mean, by the way, that you can't do more on a governmental level, again, as you get closer to the ground, which, by the way, is also embedded in the Constitution. People forget the Constitution was originally applied to the federal government, not to local and state governments. But if I were going to define conservatism, it would actually be a little broader than that, because I think to understand how people interact with government, you have to go to kind of core values. And so for me, there are a couple of premises. One, human beings have a nature. That nature is neither good nor bad. We have aspects of goodness and we have aspects of badness. Human beings are sinful. We have temptations. And what that means is that we have to be careful not to incentivize the bad, and that we should incentivize the good. Human beings do have agency and are capable of making decisions in the vast majority of circumstances. And it is better for society if we act as though they do. Second, the basic idea of human nature, there is an idea, in my view, that all human beings have equal value before the law. Yeah, I'm a religious person, so I'd say equal value before God, but I think that's also sort of a key tenet of Western civilization, being non-religious.
Oh my God. Oh my God. It is insufferable. Oh my God. Like, they both have the same exact argument, except for like a bunch of social conservatism and God shit that he's adding on. Jesus Christ, is insufferable.
Or religious.
Okay, I'm skipping.
That does not necessarily mean that every person is equally equipped to do everything equally well. And so it is not the job of government to.
It's like, yeah.
Is something that. So those are a few key tenets, and that tends to materialize in a variety of ways. The easiest way to sum that up would the traditional kind of three legs of the conservative stool. Although now obviously there's a very fragmented conservative movement in the United States. Would be
you just had two neoliberals, one Reaganite, one Bill Clintonite, and you're unironically not wrong. So I guess in a way, this is basically the left-right spectrum of like permissible ideas in the American election cycles year over year. So you're not wrong. It is neoliberalism with like marginal differences. One side is like a little bit more socially conservative than the other side. The other side is more socially progressive than the other side, but will like oftentimes concede and cede ground to the social conservatism if they feel as though that social conservatism will help them basically preserve the supposed free market or market competition that they claim to care about.
A socially conservative view in which family is the chief institution of society, like the little platoons of society, as Edmund Burke suggested, in which free markets and property rights are extraordinarily valuable and necessary, because every individual has the ability to be creative with their property.
I'm so curious.
Sure.
Okay. I'm excited for this conversation because I consider you to be really intelligent. But I feel like sometimes there are ways that conservatives talk about certain issues that seem to defy logic and reason, I guess. So here, and I'm sure you feel the same way about I feel the same way about progressives, but even some liberals for sure. Before I ask this question, it's going to relate to education. We can agree, broadly speaking, that statistics are real and that not everybody could do everything.
Dude, I'm gonna keep it $1.50. I feel like this is Destiny's way of trying to like bring in more right-wingers into his audience and like, I guess, change their mind by being very nice to Ben Shapiro. I like to look at who his enemies are and who his friends are. And on that, when I look at who he like hangs out with, who he considers to be his friends and who he considers to be his like most mortal enemies, if you find yourself routinely and regularly shitting on like the most marginal of leftist positions that have no bearing, and you routinely find yourself like hyping up a right-wing figure like Ben Shapiro, saying he's actually smart. I know that that's probably a way to like disarm him in this debate. But if you find yourself agreeing more with right-wing perspectives, which do dominate American politics, and hyper-focusing on left-wing perspectives as like the scariest thing, then you might not really be a liberal or a progressive. Okay?
So for a grounded example, my life was pretty bad. I got into streaming and I turned my life around, and that was really cool, but I can't expect everybody to do what I did, right? Like everybody being able to join the NBA or to be like a streamer.
Well, of
or-
course, everybody
yeah.
has different qualities, sure.
Okay. So I used to be a lot more libertarian when I was 21. And one of the things, manipulation of things in the, I guess, in society came when it came time to deal with my son and the school that he went to. And one of the things that I noticed was when it came time to send my son to school, I could either do private education or I could do public. Personally, I did 12 years of Catholic private education. However, the public schools in Nebraska, depending on where you lived, were very, very, very good. And I opted for a certain district. I bought a house there. I moved there. And then my son was able to go to those schools. And he's been going through those schools. And the difference of availability of like technology, like these kids are taking home iPads in like first grade. They've got like huge computer labs and everything. Do you think that there is some type of, I don't want to say injustice or unfairness, because I'm not even looking at it that way, just pragmatically, that there might be children that are in certain schools that if they just had better funding or more access to technologies or things available to them, that those kids would become more productive members of society, that with like a little bit of a help, they could actually achieve more and do better for all of society?
So I think that on the list of priorities, when you
Ben Shapiro is going to deflect away. Either go school choice here, or he's going to say that it's like family values. Okay. He could do both, honestly. But regardless, Destiny's argument here is good. It's solid. It's not just about obviously iPads and shit. There's a lot more to it, and I'm sure he will get to it. But having said that, ultimately, this conversation between these two people will not go anywhere productive unless it goes back to, I guess, how to manage taxes.
comes to education, the availability of technology is actually fairly low on the list of priorities.
Sure. The
Meaning
two
that
things I've heard are food availability and I think air conditioning, I think are the two biggest ones that I hear. But sure.
Well, I mean, the biggest thing in terms of education itself, not just the physical facilities that we're talking about, would actually be two-parent family households.
Sure.
Okay. The way to respond to this is quite simple. Okay? Of course he's going to say that because he has nothing else. He's a fucking idiot. The way to respond to this is super simple. When you look at divorce rates or when you look at two-parent household rates across the board in other countries, obviously there's other externalities that are that play a role in this, like the carceral state. Ben Shapiro will try to, of course, bring it back to like culture, which is a substitute for race in this conversation, right? But when he says, "Oh, it's the parents," it's like that's the real issue with education. The question should be, okay, like divorce rates are increasing all across the world. Why is it that educational outcomes in other countries where they have a better, more efficient public education focused structure, regardless of the divorce rates going in either direction, why do they still yield better outcomes than the United States of America? That's the question. That's the counter to this question, rather. Anything else, and if you concede, if you say something like, okay, two-parent households, that's important, the moment that you cede territory in this argument to that take, you've completely moved beyond. He has very successfully taken the conversation and led the narrative to this absolute nonsensical position. By the way, the two-party household concept is directly a consequence of material wealth. Okay, two-parent households yield better outcomes for the child, not because of some holistic, spiritual, religious reason, but because two parents imply that you have more spare time to take care of the child and you have more disposable income to ensure that the child has the child doesn't have to work, for example. It's dual income. That's what matters. Dual income and also more free time. That's what matters. And that is how you arrive at I guess the healthier, healthier, smarter, better educated. I'm not even talking about that. The other part of this conversation, of course, is that there's also a dog whistle for like a substitute for like black people too, even though, there's obviously a issue of like having children out of wedlock, if you consider it to be an issue in American society across the board. But having said that, I think that the two-parent thing is a post hoc rationalization rather than a real consistent way of solving a problem, right? A lot of those studies that Ben is talking about look at correlation and imply causation. That's the other side of this equation as well. The notion that like two-parent households are actually, they yield like more successful children is a consequence of a shit ton of different external factors. But Ben lands on that conclusion and says, and that's the way to solve it. People that come from two-parent households that have more disposable income and more free time to take care of the child are often going to have other factors that play a role in the development of the child as well.
The idea that money alone, that investment of resources is the top priority in schooling is belied by the fact that LAUSD, which is where I went to school when I was younger, they pour an enormous amount of money into LAUSD. We're talking about tens of thousands of dollars very often per student, and it does not result in better schooling outcomes. And so when you say, if we could give every kid an iPad, would you give every kid an iPad? The question is not, if I had a replicator machine from Star Trek, would I give everybody an enormous amount of stuff? Sure, I would. Every resource is finite, every resource is limited, and you have to prioritize what are the outcomes that you seek in terms of the means with which you are seeking them. And so, again, I think that the question is I quibble with the premise of the question, which is that, again, the chief injustice when it comes to education on the list of injustices is lack of availability to technology, or that it's a funding problem. I just don't think that's the case.
Sure. And I can half agree with you there, but I don't think any amount of changes in the schools will create two-parent households. Right, we can't bring a.
I totally agree with you. So that's why I think that the fundamental educational problem is not, in fact, a schooling problem. I think that it pre-exists that.
Sure, but then I feel like this is kind of the conservative merry-go-round where it's like, what can we do to help with schools? So two of the things that I've seen, I think, that are usually brought up in research is, one is air conditioning, that children in hotter environments just don't learn as well. And then the second one is access to food. So like kids that are given like a breakfast or a lunch that's provided at school, like increases educational outcomes. Now I agree that neither of these things might be determinative in like, well, 20% of kids were graduating, now 80% of kids are graduating, or these kids are all going, from with their GEDs into the workforce, and now these kids are all suddenly becoming engineers. But in terms of where we can help,